I'm pleased and honored. Do you hear me? I'm pleased and honored to have been designated by the colleagues of my department to introduce John Savage in the celebration of the 50 years of his residence in this department. I'm very pleased, I'm honored because John has been a key player in the establishment and in the development of this great body that is this department. And I'm also pleased because John and I share common interest, a common background, and common objectives. And let me just mention as a kind of note that I'm also very pleased because John devoted his best energy and charm to persuade me to join this institution many years ago. And well, John and I had an evolution, a professional evolution that has a very large number of points of contacts. We all came from electrical engineering because when we were in our green years, there was no computer science at that time. Either we came from electrical engineering or from computer or from mathematics, and we came from electrical engineering. We were fascinated by this emerging field that dealt with discrete objects using the philosophy that had been typical of engineering based on calculus. And we were fascinated by information theory and this possibility of doing computing using electronic circuits. And by the fact that there was a vibrant community around us that was stimulated by this emerging field. But although there was no computer science at that time, the growth of computer science was not easy. Computer science was growing under the mantle of electrical engineering and mathematics, the two established academic players that, although they sometimes belittled us as a kind of a field devoting to not very respectable academic endeavors, they still wanted to maintain control because they saw the potential of this field and they do not want to lose control in it. Well, then, you know, I mean, in those years, I met John for our first time, although I already knew of him, in the early 70s, and at one of the major conferences in theoretical computer sciences. And on that occasion, we talked also about his worries, about the fact that they were struggling to establish computer science here at Brown. There were the established academic units that were opposing the formation of a computer science in many ways. There was a very dynamic and enterprising trio. I mean, it was John, it was Andy Van Dam and Peter Wagner, but it was a trio. It was only a trio, and their enthusiasm and entrepreneurship was not enough for the powers that be locally to permit the creation of a department of computer science. Well, then finally, their perseverance and their patience worked and won. In 1979, the department was finally established, and it was the crowning achievement of an endeavor that had been lasting 15 years, because 15 years earlier, in the rest of the country, computer science had already been established. But the department that they established at that time, with a very small faculty, and you have seen there were 6 people at that time, from Tom Deppner's presentation before, has grown to be today one of the major players in the academic spectrum of the university. And that's really remarkable. let me just mention that beside the organizational component, where John was so powerfully active, much more important are the observations that we can make about his scientific trajectory, academic and scientific trajectory. And you have heard a lot today, and so it's not for me now to repeat things that have already been discussed. Let me just mention that John has brought his profound analytical skill to the study of theoretical computer science, especially with the theory of computation and with the first book that he published, that was The Theory of Computing, that got a lot of international acclaim. And another part that I am very proud to share with him is the fact that we have been responsive, John and I have been both responsive in many ways to the shifting image of computer science, to the emerging fields, and we have been able to grab what was essential to those fields, and John in particular has been able to apply his academic skill to the development of that. He went from VLSI theory to theory of computation to cybersecurity, and the list goes on and on and on. And so I think it is the time now to let John continue the presentation of the thing, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce John Savage.
Thank you very much. Can you turn me on? Well, you've heard so much from so many of my friends, and I have prepared this speech that I thought I should give, and I'm at this point wondering whether I should even give it. My daughter says yes, she helped me with this. So your wish is my command. So this is my personal journey. I am the product of two lovely people. My father and mother were just terrific parents. They did a fantastic job. They raised 6 children. I was fortunate to be the oldest. Here are all of my siblings and their spouses. My sister Virginia unfortunately left us just last year, but all the rest are doing well, thank you. You know, they inculcated great, terrific values in all of us. My father was fond of saying, even though he wasn't a college graduate, that he was graduated from the College of Hard Knocks. He was a very well-read man. He was well-informed about the news and a gentleman. And my mother was a beautiful person. I fondly remember her bringing in the frozen laundry during the winter when she had hung it outside to, quote, dry, unquote. You know, her hands suffered from this. I was the oldest. I had a room on the 3rd floor of a 2-family home in an old shoe manufacturing town, Lynn, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. I attended a French-Canadian parochial school, Saint Jean-Baptiste de Lynn, St. Jean's. My interest in electrical engineering began with the acquisition of a crystal radio, which I swapped for a BB gun, which I and my parents thought was dangerous to have around with so many little kids in the house. And then I got into amateur radio operation, put up antennas, one like that, acquired a receiver and transmitter, and I even built a receiver out of a Heathkit. In this case, I installed all the components, I soldered the joints, then I began to test it. And the instruction said, test the receiver to see if it's working by placing your finger on the metal part of a screwdriver and touch it to this point this contact and see if it produces a hum. I did that and received a 250-volt massive shock that knocked me on my rear end and caused my mother to come running. "John, what have you done now?" And later I saw there was an instruction just before the last one that said, "Caution, do not touch chassis with other hand." But I went back to work and I finished the receiver. So as a result of all of this, I developed a fascination with radios and in particular radio antennas. My father encouraged me to go to college, and we were living close enough to Boston so that I could go to Boston, college in Boston or Cambridge, and live at home. I was admitted to MIT, off of the waiting list, and I wasn't really prepared for this prestigious institution. In high school, my only math class was a half a course on trigonometry. And for physics, I took a night class offered in the public school, taught by the baseball coach. And as I was reading the book, I realized that he did not know how to translate home runs into an understanding of kinematic equations. Thank you to my grandson Nathan for that. So initially, I was not aware of the deficiency of my high school education. I recall sitting on a park bench in front of this great court at MIT in the fall of my first year, 1957. I thumbing through my calculus book, and with confidence I slammed it shut and went in to take my first exam at MIT. I learned that I received the lowest grade in the room. But at the end of the semester, the instructor was very proud of me because it said, "You were my most improved student." I had to pay for my way through college. I got a scholarship from my church. I had savings from working at the A&P supermarket. And that paid my expenses. And for pocket money, I worked at the student refectory, Walker Memorial. And in the April of my first year, I asked my father if he could lend me $100 so that I didn't have to work through the month of May, hoping that my grades would improve, because at this point I was right at the mean of my class in the first semester, and I was hoping to qualify for a scholarship. My father gave me the money, my grades went up, and I received the scholarship, and I didn't have to work during the next 3 years at MIT. One interesting experience I had in the job was that I bussed the tray of an elderly gentleman in a suit sitting alone, whom I recognized as Niels Bohr, the Nobel laureate in physics. This undergraduate education was demanding, but it was superb. At that point, electrical engineering had been transformed at MIT from motors and electricity distribution to a science-based education. For example, I was exposed to quantum mechanics as an undergraduate. Throughout these years, I never lost my fascination with antennas. Here's Niels Bohr. I was a co-op student at Bell Labs, and each of the first times I went out for an assignment, I asked to have something to do with antennas. They denied me the first time, but the second time they took me down to Holmdel, New Jersey, where this horn antenna had just been put up. It was a very sensitive, highly directional antenna, and they had to calibrate it. And they offered the job to me, and I thought it was going to be boring, so I turned it down. This was my second near encounter with a Nobel Prize. While they were doing that calibration, they heard a hiss from all directions of the sky, which they recognized as evidence of the Big Bang creation of the universe. So in my senior year, I'm finally able to take, and by the way, the course on electromagnetism that I had as a junior was my favorite course. So I'm now all primed to take the antenna course. And when I sat in the class, I found it was really a very old-fashioned course. And so I quickly dropped it and started drifting toward coding, communication theory, and information theory. And from both my master's and PhD theses, I did research on something called sequential decoding. That idea was developed by Jack Wozencraft, who's on the right here in this picture. And he persuaded me to analyze it, do a probabilistic analysis, the kind of analysis that I did with Andre and Patrick Lincoln for nanotechnology. Claude Shannon's on the left. He's observing all of this. And having studied this machine and learning about its limitations on its performance, when I saw it in the flesh, I was just completely flabbergasted. This is the decoder, and one of these little panels over here is the encoder. So there was a huge disparity in the size between the encoder and the decoder. I graduated and I left MIT in January 1965, went to Bell Labs. They were using different technology, same kind of disparity in the size of encoder and decoder. I just could not get this out of my head. So I began to work on this, and I realized that a decoder was a finite state machine. For all those of us who are computer scientists, this is the model of a finite state machine. And then one night, I did something incredibly trivial. I took the finite state machine, which you can think of as a loop, and I unwound the loop and created from the one logic circuit providing inputs to a memory. I put down T copies of that logic unit. I made a logic circuit, and then I knew that this was not necessarily the size of the smallest logic circuit. So the smallest logic circuit, you could construct a circuit for the task that was done by this machine, whose complexity was at most this, but this is the smallest required for that problem. And then when, as Larry pointed out, when you apply this to the random access machine that we all like to use as our standard model for computation, what emerges is that this constant that I had, C of L, is proportional to the storage capacity of that device. And so suddenly you have this kind of an inequality. And when I saw this, I had this great undergraduate education, I saw this as this constraint as a parallel to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which says that you can't measure the position of momentum with high perfect precision. But the community that I was in, I just didn't want to hear this. So the result of that was that I felt Larry and I worked together on this, but I eventually had to write this book. And it turned out it was the first book on circuit complexity. I didn't know that at the time. So Larry and I worked together. And then Andre and I make contact, and I get involved with the VLSI model and that Clark Thompson introduced. And I won't go into detail because it's getting late. But in the interim, I write this book with two undergraduate students, Sue Magidson and Alex Stein. We start writing it when they were undergraduates, signed a contract. And then along came Jose Costanza. And by the way, if I would have read my remarks, I would have mentioned all of my PhD students. But I didn't. So Jose came along, and you heard what he did. He I'll tell you what he did. He implemented the finite element method as a technique for solving complex differential equations efficiently through computation. And it's a very complex problem. He did a great job and got a job on the Blue Gene team. And then at about the same time, I published this book, Models of Computation, that you heard about, and then learned about this National Nanotechnology Initiative, got a starter grant. I met Andre, and I met Charles Lieber. We then obtained a larger grant together. Eric Racklin resulted from that whole effort. And then I decided to take a flyer and spend a year in the State Department. You know that lady in blue there, I think, right? Okay. And then I've been doing this kind of thing, working on problems of this type. This is a paraphrase of the titles of some of the output that I produced. And then you've heard that about the Atlantic Council. Luke was part of this team that won first place. These three people are now all, these three people are all now employees of McKinsey Corporation. Is that right? And where are you going, Luke? Huh?
2 of the 3. Jared's in
He's in transit? He's in China. But he's coming back. I heard he's taking a job. Oh, really? Yeah. Yeah. So I've been affiliated also for several years with the East-West Institute, with the Boston Global Forum. Tuan Nguyen, who's the CEO of the Boston Global Forum, is here today. So I'm looking forward to my future, and if any of you have any ideas. This is my immediate family. They're all here today. Christopher is actually the tallest, but he's kneeling. And my extended family, some of my extended family members couldn't travel. Carrie is expecting a child, Kevin's wife, in June 10th, I believe, right? And I'll have to tell you that, I've been blessed to be part of this community. It's granted me the freedom to do what I did. It has given me opportunities to serve in ways that I never expected. And I have to thank everyone who was a member of this community with whom I spent my career. And I want to make a special mention of the chairs. These people work very hard for their department. Their role is, they're invisible really if they're successful. I've been one of them, as you know. And altogether, this has been a great run. I couldn't have imagined any better way to have spent my professional career. And I want to thank all of you who were here tonight and all of you who have spoken, especially my daughter who has supported this new chair that's being discussed in my honor. Thank you all very much.
All the services that you have done. You've been an inspiration for many of us. So what I would like to do now is to present this little token of our appreciation for you on behalf of the department. I don't think, if you want, you can open it. It's a little crystal with 3D embeddings that include all the major services that you have done and the research areas that you pursued. And the designer is our own Lauren Clark, who's sitting over there.
He needs some grandchildren to come open this up, I think. That's
all right, be
one.
careful. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So this is the base, so that's the important piece, so be careful. The other way, yeah.
Ooh, look at this.
All right. No, you don't, that's good.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate you all coming here today. And we wish the department success, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So by the way, I also would like to thank everyone for coming. I think this has been a wonderful event, but we are not done yet. So I'd like to ask you to join us in CIT, that's the CS building. So we're going to have our reunion reception, and we're going to continue the celebration with drinks, some snacks, and some toast to John. All right, so we'll meet over there. Thank you.